It is 5:31, and Rob Plunkett and I will call this meeting to order. And the item on our agenda is the presentation by James W. Barlow. I'm reading.
You're reading off the slide, yeah.
Should we be speaking at the same time, so we're both doing it at the same time?
So you need to say something.
I need to say something.
Yeah.
We call the meeting to order, and we give the floor to James Barlow.
Okay, you ready?
We're ready.
Good, thank you very much for having me. By way of introduction, a little more than that, my name is Jim Barlow. Please call me Jim. I am an attorney here in private practice. I work exclusively in the area of municipal law, so my clients are exclusively Vermont towns around the state. Before doing that, I was 3 years the city attorney in the city of South Burlington. So I was the first in-house attorney in South Burlington, working there exclusively. And before that, I was with the League of Cities and Towns as an attorney for 9 years. And before that, I lived here in Bennington, and I worked with Tom Jacobs and Justine Scanlon and Lon McClintock in their office here. So I have been asked to come down and talk to you folks and to the committee about the Bennington Town Charter and the amendment of that charter. For those of you who are not aware, it is available online at the legislature's webpage in the statute section. Under Title 24A, the appendix to Title 24, you will find all of the charters of the municipalities of the state of Vermont, including the town of Bennington, so you can find a copy online there. And there's also a copy available in every town office, including the Bennington town office, in the statutes, in the green books that are kept there. So you can go and find a copy of it there as well. So I've been asked to come down and talk about your charter. What we were going to talk about is what is a municipal governance charter. We'll talk about some of the forms of Vermont local government to give you some context about where Bennington fits into the picture and what some of the options are available to you. Some things to consider when you are amending a charter or your charter, as well as talk about the actual process that has to be followed. It's laid out, the process for amending a municipal charter is laid out by law in statute, and you will be following that process as you move forward from today. So when we look around the country outside of the state of Vermont, there are 39 states in the country in which municipalities, in which local governments are basically free to organize themselves and to pass local ordinances or laws in any way that they see fit, so long as that ordinance or that organizational structure comports with the state constitution or the United States Constitution. And this is called municipal home rule. In these states, in these 39 states, municipalities really have the freedom to do a lot of what they want to do as far as organizing and running their local government. This is called municipal home rule. And Vermont is among the remainder of the states that does not allow for municipal home rule. We do it differently, which is kind of odd when you think about it, because we really consider ourselves sort of the local democracy, local participation, going to town meeting state. We're all familiar with the, are you okay? I don't want to block you off too much. We think about Norman Rockwell's 4 freedoms, and one of those is the gentleman standing up in town meeting and giving his opinion. And that's how we kind of think of ourselves, which is a little bit ironic when you consider the fact that we are not granted municipal home rule. In the state of Vermont, okay, municipalities, local governments, are only given the powers specifically delegated to them by the legislature in Montpelier. All right? And only such additional authorities as are necessary to carry out those express powers. Okay? So we operate local government in the state of Vermont according to the rules not that we make, but according to the rules that are made for us by the legislature. So that's how we are fundamentally different. And the Supreme Court of the state of Vermont has said if there's any fair doubt concerning the existence of a municipal power or authority account, that power must be resolved against the municipality. So we are not given the benefit of the doubt. All right? And that's the presumption that we have when we are looking at state law as it applies to municipalities. So what is a municipal governance charter? It is a grant of state law. It is effectively a statute, okay, approved by the local voters and the legislature that sets out specific laws for the operation of local government in a municipality, all right? So there are 9 cities in the state of Vermont. Each one of them operates under a municipal governance charter. There are 52 towns that have governance charters, and there are at least 50 villages and some fire districts and some other municipal entities. And again, they are all operating under a state statute, a governance charter, that applies specifically to the borders, the boundaries of the area of that municipality.
And Jim, before you go on, one thing that we forgot to mention is that Jim will be taking questions, and I'll be the first one to do it.
Absolutely.
In terms of the city and the town municipal charters, are they essentially the same type of document, or is a city charter very different from a town charter?
Well, they are the same document in the way that they come into being and the way that they are approved. But when you look, we'll talk a little bit, I'll look at some of the provisions of a couple city charters. Typically what you are going to see is that a city is more representational and less participatory, okay? So they'll have some organizational and structural differences, right? But again, it's still the same document. It's the organizational law that applies to that municipality. And as Rob said, if you have any questions, raise your hand, okay? And I will answer them and we'll do our best. Yes, Mr.
What
Robbins?
Rob's getting at is that there's no magic you can call a city versus a town. You could have the exact same government structure in a town versus a city. It doesn't really indicate what your government structure is.
You are what you choose to call yourself, all right? And there's variability among town charters as to how they're organized, and there's variability among city charters. And really it doesn't, if you say, well, we are a city, it doesn't mean that there's some specific formula for the way that you are organized. You know? And it also doesn't, it's not by population, and nor is it by geographic area. It's really what the municipality chooses to call itself, right? Good, right? So by undertaking consideration of amendments to the Bennington Governance Charter, what you are effectively doing is actually considering amendments to the law of the state of Vermont as it applies within the boundaries of the town of Bennington. So you are effectively starting a process, or in a process, for amending state law that will apply just here. So, one of the difficulties whenever we have 2 laws that address the same topic is, how do we reconcile those 2? So we have general laws of the state of Vermont for operation of municipal government, and then we might have a charter that is specific to a geographic area. How do we reconcile them? How do we make them work? Well, the Vermont Supreme Court says that when addressing a conflict between a municipal charter and a provision of general statute, that the court will apply the long-standing rule of statutory construction that where 2 statutes deal with the same subject matter and one is general and the other specific, the more specific controls. So the Bennington Charter controls over general state law in areas where the Bennington Charter and state law address the same topic. So for example, in Bennington, you elect 7 select board members, correct? Law generally across the state of Vermont for the operation of town government says you have towns have a choice, either 3 or 5 select boards depending on what they choose, select board members depending on what they choose. So 7 controls over 3 or 5. That's the way it works. Right? What happens when state law is changed? So for example, we might have an amendment to law that allows for the appointment of a municipal officer, but the charter that now allows appointment of a municipal officer, but the charter provides that that officer has to be elected. Well, you have to follow the charter even though state general law has been amended. All right? And that's the way, that's one of the, if there is a pitfall of having a charter, is that you need to keep it up and keep with it and keep fresh, because sometimes general law of the state of Vermont can advance faster than your municipal charter. And you'll see this when you look through Bennington's charter and other places. You'll see references to things like sprinkling the streets with oil and controlling dust. Things that were very important issues in the turn of the last century that no longer are really relevant, but nevertheless, they are still on the books in your town. They are still part of your charter. Any questions so far? Good. Keep right on rolling. All right? So when I look at local government in the state of Vermont, I think there's basically 4 characteristics that define how the government operates, or 4 characteristics that define the specific model. First thing I would look at, if I was looking at a charter, which officers are elected and which are appointed. That is a very key difference, because the appointment authority vests typically one body with the authority to appoint another officer. Election comes directly from the voters. So there's an element of authority and power that goes along with that. So we're going to look at who's elected and who's appointed. Who appoints, controls, and directs municipal employees? Is this a manager form of government where all of those employees effectively are responsible to the manager and then the board oversees the manager? Or is this, for example, a statutory town where those employees might be reporting directly to the select board? How are the budget and tax rates set? What's the process for appropriating money, determining the tax rate, things along those lines? And then also, what powers the voters have relative to the authority granted municipal officials? When do the voters get to weigh in on certain things? In different municipalities, voters are afforded different opportunities to participate in things through the charter. So, for example, Bennington has a relatively unique provision. I think they're one of only 16 municipalities where you can recall an elected officer. It's an authority granted to the voters to vote someone out of office. Other municipalities don't have that. So that's one of those situations where the voters are given an authority that generally is not available in state law. So all of these different elements playing together sort of define the model. And they're all different points that can be sort of changed around to set up or to establish a slightly different governance structure. Okay? So when we look at all this, we sort of need to have a starting point. What is the baseline for local government in the state of Vermont? And the baseline, the basic statutory unit of local government in Vermont is the town. Wow, isn't that amazing? There are towns in the state of Vermont. Why are there towns? Because the legislature says there shall be towns. So how are those towns organized? Well, the basic statutory model is the town, and in each one of those towns, there are typically at least 16 elected town officers responsible for local government operations. So, for example, if we were to leave Bennington and drive down to Pownell, what we would see is an elected 5-member select board, elected clerk, elected treasurer, a constable, town agent, listers to prepare the grand list, auditors to review the books of the town prior to town meeting, a grand juror that we're not really sure what the grand juror does anymore, quite honestly, okay? A moderator to run town meeting, and a delinquent tax collector. And that is the basic model under which they operate, and the majority of towns in the state of Vermont. It looks like this. And that's sort of the organizational chart for the statutory form of government in this town government in the state of Vermont. And what you'll notice is, you think about your typical organizational chart, it is a very pyramidal type structure, where we have lower levels reporting to higher levels, reporting to higher levels. But you'll notice how horizontal this is, right, across the board. None of those officers reports to any of the other independently elected officers, and actually are only accountable to the voters. And because we don't have recall, once they get elected, they serve essentially until they either leave their office voluntarily or become incapacitated and unable to fulfill their responsibilities. And so a very horizontal organizational chart without any links between the boxes. The voter's primary authority in that chart, right, is the election of town officers. Yes, Tom?
Could you go back to that chart?
Absolutely.
There's highway department, and there's Select board.
Yes, select board typically oversees the highway department. We might have a road commissioner in there as well. Okay?
Water, sewer departments.
Water, sewer, yes. I took the sort of basic, the basic town where we don't have a water system, we don't have a sewer system. We probably have 75 miles of gravel roads in town. We probably have 3 or 4 road crew employees, and it's going to look like that.
Yeah, basic form. There is no mayor, no town manager in that line between the highway department.
That's another iteration. We'll talk about the next sort of evolution beyond that basic statutory form. This is the form that is, if you were to drive around the state of Vermont, the majority, significant majority of municipalities, towns, run under this organizational structure.
So since we're in the weeds a little bit,
Sure.
I was wondering what, it says a board of cemetery commissioners and
Yep.
a board of library trustees.
Mm-hmm.
That says to me it's more than one.
Yes.
So they,
Typically a board of 5 library trustees. Okay?
if the town has a library.
If the town has a library, you don't have to have a municipal library. You have to have a vote to have a municipal library. And then thereafter, you elect a board of library trustees. You don't necessarily have to have a board of cemetery commissioners. The select board could take over that responsibility. So I guess this is sort of the most, the broadest number of
most
officers that you could
inclusive.
have.
The most inclusive.
The most inclusive.
Horizontal.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Exactly right. Okay? So again, in that model, going back, the voter's primary authority is the election of town officers and the adoption of the town budget. And so we have town meeting every year in the state of Vermont, Tuesday in March. And if you were to step back and look, basically every town in the state of Vermont is doing the same 2 things every year. They're always going to be passing a budget or voting on a budget. It may or may not pass. And they're always going to be electing a slate of officers. And then there's going to be other things that some towns may be doing that year and others not. But by and large, it's going to look, the warning for town meeting is going to look substantially similar in Pownell as it does in Marshfield where I live or in Barnet down the road. I mean, pretty much we're all doing the same thing. Why? Because we operate under this statutory model. The legislature says, this is what you shall do at town meeting. Right? Voters adopt the town budget. The select board sets the tax rate. The select board administers the budget during the fiscal year. In managing that budget, the select board has some discretion to deviate from the budget as circumstances require during the year. And there are other authorities vested in the voters. We talked about primarily budget and election of officers, including right to disapprove town ordinances. So the way it works, basic model in the state of Vermont, select board adopts it, voters have the opportunity, it's town meeting to vote it down. Doing things, also authority to do things like voting on zoning bylaws, approve borrowing and bonding, things like that. So that's it. As I said earlier, under that basic model, no individually elected officer is accountable to another officer in the performance of their duties. And that actually was established as a matter of law right here in Bennington. A Supreme Court case that came out of, back in, I believe it was 1921, the town clerk in Bennington wanted to utilize this brand new technology called the photocopier, because the town clerk had been by hand copying the deeds into the town's books. And this was a light year leap ahead in technology that would alleviate the town clerk's burden of doing this. And the select board thought, that's a terrible idea. We don't think that technology ought to be used here in Bennington, right? And we're going to tell the town clerk that you can't use the photocopier to photocopy the deeds. It went all the way to the Vermont Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said in Bennington v. Booth that no, the select board does not have the authority to tell the town clerk how the town clerk is to perform the town clerk's job when the town clerk is performing the statutory responsibility. So it all started here, for better or for worse. Okay?
Is that Timmy?
It was Timmy, right? Right? So, as an organizational structure, that town form of government relies heavily on political remedies and what I call social control. And basically, you were elected to the select board, and we know you, and you better behave yourself and do a good job, or else. Whatsoever else, well, we'll never talk to you again, or we'll talk a lot about you behind your back, all right? Really, and that's a lot of it. And there's the quote here from former Governor Dean Davis: "Tradition in many respects had a force of unwritten law and was indeed a force stronger than the law." Really, I mean, this is the way we always done it, and you ought to keep doing it that way, because that works pretty well for us around here, okay? That town structure generally emphasizes political accountability over efficiency of operations. I tell folks, if you want to get anything done in local government in the state of Vermont, take what you think is a reasonable amount of time and multiply it by 10. Okay? Because that's just the way it works. That is the organizational structure. It is about political accountability and not necessarily about efficiency. And sometimes that can be a good thing. We don't always like when government moves too fast, right? All right? It's a structure that assumes a high level of transparency, so that we know what is going on as the voters, so we can elect folks or not elect folks. Relative simplicity in operations, so we can all understand the budget when we vote on it at town meeting. Knowledge about municipal operations, there has to be some sort of general level of understanding of what we're all doing here, and a relatively high level of citizen engagement. If the voters aren't paying attention, this doesn't work very well. It has a tendency to sort of go off the rails, right? This reliance on political remedies is mitigated by the fact there is no statutory process for recall. So once individuals are elected to office outside of Bennington, they hold that office through their term, come hell or high water. And there have been select board members who have served their term from a jail cell in the state of Vermont. Right?
I have a question, Bill.
Yes, ma'am.
But aren't there some towns that put in some parameters for elected officials, like absenteeism for a select board, or
Yes.
term limits, or that kind
And
of thing?
so we're just talking about the basic statutory model, but one of the things that municipalities can do through their charter is, for example, say, in order to hold the office, you have to attend a certain number of select board meetings, or not be absent for more than a certain number of select board meetings. Right? So that's one of the ways that you can vary the basic model to address a condition or an issue in your town. All right? So, about 175 towns operate under that basic model. Some towns, you look up, looking to the north in Shaftesbury, into some slightly smaller respect down in Pownell, employ a town administrator who's not a statutory officer, works for the select board to help them carry out their responsibilities. But that's pretty much the basic model. Okay? You don't operate under the basic model, but it's a good starting point for understanding. So, where do we go from here?
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
Before we're going. In towns where they do have rules about absenteeism on a select board,
Yes.
what is the purpose of that rule?
To make sure that select board members show up for the meetings and participate?
Towards what end?
Yeah, I'm sorry?
Towards what end? I mean, is it to ensure the operation of town government? Is it to ensure representation of the people? Is it to punish
I
people
think
for
that's
not
interesting.
showing
What
up?
is the intent behind it? It'd be tough. You'd have to sort of go to each individual municipality and say, how come you did this? What was the intent of your voters? Did you have a lot of absenteeism? Were you unable to hold meetings because you didn't have a quorum? Okay, so I don't think it's uniform. I think it would probably depend from municipality or town to town. Okay? So, the next iteration beyond the statutory form, what is next beyond that? And that's the municipal manager form of local government. You have the municipal manager form here in the town of Bennington. This is what you are operating under. Okay? It's the most common variation from the statutory model. There are two different ways that it can come about. Municipalities can vote under a statute that authorizes them to adopt this, or you could do it as Bennington has done it through your charter. All right? About 54 municipalities, and I have to say about because it changes every year and I try to keep up with it, but it's about 54 municipalities presently are operating under this model right now in the state. Right? That model, in my opinion, it's not just my opinion, it is reality, significantly alters the role of the select board in that town. All right? So generally what happens is the select board retains the quasi-judicial functions of a select board, meaning things like the holding hearings, not hearings on adopting rules, but hearings on things like dog bites, right? The old Vermont dog bite hearing. What are we going to do with a dog that bit somebody? All right. And it retains the legislative function, and by that what we mean is the ability to adopt ordinances, to set rules, policies of the town. But the administrative and executive functions that used to be vested in the select board are moved over to the town manager, to one individual who is hired by the board. In the manager form, the select board members are the elected representatives of the community, and theoretically the select board concentrates more on policy and ensuring that the government is responsive to what the community wants it to be. So it's a step back, right? The manager is hired to assist the board in determining policy. Hey, here's some information, here's some ideas, here's some things you might think about, and to carry out the board's policy decisions. So, here's the personnel policy that we are going to implement, and you manager, will implement that, for example. The manager serves at the direction of the board and may be terminated if not responsive to the board's wishes. So it builds in an element of accountability in the organizational structure. And it starts looking like this. Okay, so we move here from our basic model, where we had all of these independently elected officers, and then under the select board, we now have a town manager who's responsible for all of these municipal departments. And it's usually typically a bigger municipality, so we have a recreation department, highway department, public safety, police department, things along those lines. So it starts looking more like that pyramid structure that we're more familiar with in sort of private organizations. Okay? Under the statutory form, the basic town, select board operates like the proprietors of a small business. They do it all. Right? They are the shareholders, the directors, the officers, the managers, and the employees simultaneously. They're the group responsible for making sure things get done. In the manager form, they're less like the proprietors of the small business and more like the directors of a corporation, public corporation. Right? I say strategically engaged in setting the town's policies and directions, but operationally distant from day-to-day functions, theoretically. Right? Theoretically increases accountability because we have one person, an employee of the select board, who is responsible for delivering town services. And theoretically more efficient because it removes that group. You ever try to get anything done with a group, right? I mean, how difficult it is to do anything with a group,
Herding
right?
cats. Herding cats.
Herding cats, right? So we take the cat herd away and we put one person in charge, and then we make the cat herd responsible for overseeing that person in charge. All right? So it theoretically increases efficiency in government, in the delivery of government services. Yes, sir.
There we go. Your slide up there just said the town manager can be terminated if
Yep.
that person is not responsive to the wishes of the select board.
Yep.
Our charter says the town manager can be terminated without cause.
Yes.
Are those two different statements? Is ours unusual, or how can you reconcile those two?
I can try to.
Okay.
All right. If we look at, I said there were two ways that municipalities could adopt the manager form of government. One is through a vote under state statute. The other is through adoption of a charter that provides for a municipal manager. If we look at the statutory form of manager government in the state of Vermont, the law requires that the manager only be removed for cause. So that's sort of the default, is for cause. We have to, basically, we're going to have a hearing, we're going to make a determination that there is good and sufficient cause before removing the manager. Charters can do it differently and don't have to have a for cause provision. The manager can be an at-will employee of the town, if that's what the charter provides. And different towns, through their charters, do it in different ways. I can't tell you how many do it this way or specifically who does it this way and that way, but it is done in different ways, and in some municipalities, the manager is an at-will employee, and in other municipalities, they can only be removed for cause. In the city of Vergennes, the manager is appointed annually by the city council. Right? So you only hold your job for 1 year, and hopefully you get reappointed next year. So it's done differently there as well. Good? Okay. All right. So moving on from, we started at the statutory basic form, the town, then the next level of evolution beyond that is the town manager form of government, where we're trying to build in some efficiency and some accountability into this really horizontal organizational chart. The sort of next level of evolution beyond that, potentially, is city government. All right? And when we look at, there are presently 9 cities in the state of Vermont. We talked earlier, what defines a city? Well, basically because we want to call ourselves a city. That's why we do it. It is not certainly population that defines a city, because Bennington, Essex, and Colchester are among the top 10 municipalities in the state of Vermont in terms of population, but none of you or them call yourself a city, all right? Each has a governance charter, and each system, unlike a statutory town, but they are not cities, or at least they don't call themselves that. All right? So going back to the sort of 4 general characteristics: who's elected, who's appointed, who directs municipal employees, how are the budget and tax rates set, and what powers do the voters have in relation to the authority granted at local officials, we can look at city government in the state of Vermont. What you're going to find, typically, a city has fewer elected and more appointed officers. We look at the city of South Burlington, they elect 5 city council members and a clerk, and that's all the elected officers in South Burlington. I believe that in Essex town presently, only the select board is elected, and they appoint everyone else. All right? So that's a pretty significant change from the statutory model. Yes, Tom.
They is the select board or the councils that appoint everyone else?
They appoint everyone else. So the elected select board members in Essex, I believe, appoint every other officer in the town. Clerk, treasurer, auditor, lister, assessor, probably. All right, so that's the way that they work.
Jim, I'm just going to interject. There's a couple people that came in sort of after you started, and I just want them to know that they can ask questions. That there's, if you have a question, just raise your hand.
Raise your hand and just let me know.
Jim will call on you.
Okay, all right. And it's good for me too. It helps me evaluate whether I'm getting it to you or not. Right. So please feel free. Most cities in the state of Vermont have a city manager, but not all. Rutland does not have a city manager, nor does Burlington. Burlington has a chief administrative officer. Rutland has a mayor who works as a full-time, essentially staff person of the city. Right? Most cities, but not South Burlington, have a mayor. But the mayor's authority relative to the city manager varies quite a bit from municipality to municipality, and relative to the city council as well.
Can I ask a question on the mayors?
Absolutely.
In the case of mayors, are they typically paid full-time job, or are they holding their own job and doing it as a part-time?
Typically, they're holding their own job, and being a mayor is sort of a part-time after-hours gig. In the city of Rutland, the mayor is a full-time employee of the city. So David Allard that's the role that he fills. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. All of the rest, it's a part-time role, not an administrative role, essentially more of a ceremonial type role, and a running the city council role. Right? We'll talk about that. What we're going to see is generally city government is more representational and less participatory, because it's harder to get all of us, when there's 17,000 people in the city, to participate in town meeting, for example. So we have to elect people to represent us and don't have that opportunity for direct participation. Each of the cities in the state of Vermont accomplishes the same basic requirements. I mean, they're all basically doing a similar thing, but each goes about it in a different way. And there is no one best model in all of this. It's really a function of what do we want to do and what works best for us. And each one works. So we'll look at Rutland City, for example. They have a population of 17,292, or that's what they had the last time I looked on Wikipedia. They elect a mayor, treasurer, and assessor to 2-year terms. So, for example, you have annual elections and what's the term of the treasurer here? 3-year term, all right? The city clerk and city attorney are appointed to 2-year terms by the mayor. So interestingly there, the clerk is responsible to the mayor and not to the board of aldermen in that appointment, all right? And there is no city manager, as I said earlier, in Rutland. The mayor is a full-time employee who is doing many of the manager's job, much of the manager's job in Rutland City. They have an 11-member board of aldermen, each elected to 2-year terms, and they are elected at large. That's one of the things to consider in coming up with a governance chart. Do we want to have at-large elections where we elect someone regardless of where they reside, or do we want to have wards and elect folks to represent us in our ward, in our geographic area? South Burlington has wards. At least they have voting wards, excuse me.
Burlington has wards.
Burlington has wards, that's right. All right? The aldermen adopt and amend city ordinances, and the aldermen confirm appointments made by the mayor. So like the advice and consent of the Senate, it's similar in the city of Rutland. The Rutland makes the appointment, but the Board of Aldermen have to confirm that. Yes, sir.
Majority or supermajority?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, Tom. I think it's just majority. I would assume it's just majority confirmation. Okay? The mayor can veto an action passed by the Board of Aldermen, which is unique in the state of Vermont. I don't believe that there's any other mayor who has the authority to do that, but that veto authority can be overridden by the council. And the mayor appoints the department heads and officers, again, subject to confirmation by the Board of Aldermen.
Well, that seems, you know, it just seems a little odd that the mayor appoints, the aldermen
Confirm.
confirm, but then the mayor can veto.
Yeah, the mayor can't veto the confirmation votes of the aldermen. Okay, I don't believe that that the mayor has that veto authority. It's
Okay.
other things that they can veto.
Okay.
Okay, they made it to the same slide, but they're not. They don't intersect. Okay.
All right.
Does it have to be a simple majority or unanimous?
I believe it's simple majority. Okay, I didn't go and look before I came down, so might be wrong.
I'm Jim Carroll.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming. All right. Think I'm right? Yeah, I think so. All right. The mayor with the president of the Board of Aldermen comprise what's called a Board of Finance in Rutland, and they approve the payment of bills, and upon approval of board order, the mayor signs the warrant authorizing the treasurer to pay money. Typically, we're going to have a warrant here. Select board approves the orders for payment. It's a much more direct and simplified process. The appointed city clerk in Rutland has the same general statutory authority as a town clerk, the elected city treasurer. So again, appointed city clerk rather than elected city clerk. Elected city treasurer has the basic responsibilities as a town treasurer of keeping the city's books, acts as the collector also of current and delinquent taxes, and they have an elected assessor. You have listers here in Bennington, and that is one of the functions that is really sort of up in the air right now in the state of Vermont. Different towns are approaching this sort of problem in different ways. Should we have an elected board of listers to put together our grand list? Should we have, it's difficult to find folks to fulfill that role. It's becoming technically more difficult every year. So then we look to potentially professional assessors to do that. Are those people going to be appointed or elected? So it's one of these sort of problems that we're sort of trying to solve as we move forward here in the state of Vermont. You folks elect a board of listers who then appoint an assessor? Is that how it's? No, I'm sorry, you appoint a board of listers, but you also then hire an assessor. All right, okay, so that's a little bit different too. Okay. That's fine if it's working for you here in Bennington. So we go from Rutland City and we go up the road to Berry City. And they're both calling themselves cities, but we'll look and see how they differ from each other. And we'll also sort of look at the difference between the authority. I know you're considering having a mayor. I picked these two because it's sort of a compare and contrast about the office of mayor in those two different cities and how those roles differ. All right. So Berry City has a population of just over 9,000. They have a clerk, a treasurer, and a mayor elected to 2-year terms. And they have a city manager who is appointed by the city council. So the city manager is appointed by the city council and not the mayor, so that creates an interesting sort of dynamic right there, potentially. Have manager who is appointed by and responsible to the council, although the mayor is part of the council, but the mayor is not the manager is not directly accountable to the mayor. All right, so that sets up an interesting dynamic. And they have an assessor appointed by the city manager, which works as well, subject to approval by the city council. So you can start to see about different models, different towns go, and different cities, how we're going to go about fulfilling these basic functions. They have a, yes, Mr. Carroll.
Under that model,
Yes.
who has the final say? If the mayor says, I want this, and the manager says, well, you're not getting it.
The manager proposes the budget. The mayor does not have any independent authority apart from the council, is a member
It's not
of
unilateral,
voting.
you can't say do it.
Do it, not do it. But we'll talk a little bit about personalities and how things are different in different communities, okay? And how that intersects with all of this as well.
So the final word,
Ultimately is to the city council, all right? Ultimately, okay? And I think it's a little bit, I would say that it's to the city council of which the mayor is a member. And if you were to compare that in Rutland, we have a board of aldermen where the mayor is sort of sits a little bit outside of that, less part of the team of the board of aldermen and more part of the staff and the management
in Rutland.
in Rutland. Okay? So they're
And what's
different.
the final word there?
Depends on what the issue is. All right? Does. I mean, I'm not being like trying to be straight. It depends on what the issue is, ultimately. Okay. In Berry City, city council comprised of 6 councilors and the mayor, and only 1 council member is elected from each of 3 wards. Right? And the mayor is elected biannually, so every other year. The council appoints the city manager, most boards and committee members, and fills vacancies in elected office. So in Rutland, we had the mayor making appointments subject to approval by the council. Here we have the council appointing the city manager and essentially making those decisions on their own, not the mayor. And the council adopts ordinances and determines all matters of city policy. That language comes from their charter. When you look at it, the mayor is the leader of the city council in Berry. Less manager and more leader of the council. Is responsible under the charter for presiding at all meetings of the council, can call special council meetings, and participates as a full voting member, and really has little executive authority under that charter arrangement. There is some really unique language, though, when you look at the Berry City Charter, and I think it comes out of their history. If you're familiar with Berry City, they had 4 labor strikes in the city over a period of about 50 or 60 years. And these were big things. These were all of the workers in the granite sheds, which essentially is the entire economic activity in the city of Berry, all go on strike. They had the National Guard out to bring order back to Berry City. And out of that, I think, came this provision. The mayor shall be the chief conservator of the peace and safety of the city, and as such is empowered to control and direct the police force in case of riot, insurrection, or other emergency, when he or she may take command of the whole police force, including the chief executive thereof. So chief, you're not operating on your own, now the mayor's in charge. And may, for the occasion, appoint and commission as many special policemen as he or she may deem necessary, who shall have all the powers of regular members of the police force. The mayor can deputize anybody that the mayor wants, and they have full authority as a police officer in the city of Barrington. Yeah, wow. Wow, right? Wow. But it comes out of that history and what transpired in Barry over a period of years. Yes, sir.
I mean, we're aware that most police officers go through a certification process and have to be certified in order to
exercise law enforcement
That's
authority.
right. And now we're seeing that happen with the constables. The constables are no
Constable.
longer
Yes.
just the guy who looks at the light in his car.
Right.
Does that overrule what the state demands of certification processes?
No. Does that overrule? Yes, in Berry City it does. That sort of notion of you need to be careful what's in your charter as state law evolves and you sort of stay back in the 19th and 20th century, okay? Things are a little bit different in Berry City if it hits the fan, you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Go back.
Yes, sir.
I've got a question. Is this only applicable under an emergency?
Is this only applicable what?
Under an emergency? Can the mayor at any time or manager?
In case of riot, insurrection, or other emergency. Okay, so it's not just like any time that, things that,
He's pissed off.
He's right, yeah. Tom Lozon gets a little mad, he appoints some deputies and they're all carrying guns these days. No, it's not that. There's got to be a riot or an insurrection, okay?
Well,
Good.
an emergency could be a flood, right? I mean, a
Yep.
natural disaster.
Yep. And I think if I was counseling the mayor in the city of Barry, I'd be very careful about that appointment authority. Okay? All right?
You might have a hard time getting insurance.
You might have a hard time getting insurance. You might have a hard time getting a city attorney because they're, Okay? The more realistic authority granted to the Barry City Mayor. The mayor shall preside at all meetings of the city council and shall have a voice and vote in its proceedings. He or she shall be recognized as the head of municipal government for all ceremonial purposes and by the governor for purposes of military law. Well, there's a little of the holdover again, for purposes of military law. In the event of his or her inability to act, his or her absence or disability, the council shall designate one of its members to act as mayor during his or her absence or disability. So that's really more, there is that military law provision, but that's really more what the mayor is about in the city of Barry. In Barry City, the manager is actually the chief administrative officer, not the mayor. The manager is appointed by the city council to an annual term. So going back to, it's an annual appointment in the city of Barry as well as Virgins. And that manager holds the office at the will of the city council and can be removed without cause. That's the language in their charter. Right?
So can I ask a question there?
Yes, ma'am.
So in Barry, is the mayor kind of similar to our select board chair with the exception of the military police provision?
Yeah, I think so, but is expressly granted more recognition than the select board chair, as is recognized as the ceremonial head of government in the city of Barry, whereas, the select board chair, Tom, you're the select board chair, you're a nice guy, but I don't know if you qualify as the ceremonial head of government yet, right?
Wouldn't want it.
You wouldn't want it, right? Okay. It is. There is sort of more pomp and circumstance, we might say, imposed on the mayor than on the chair of the select board. More expectation for that, yes.
Yeah, I was going to wait, but Lynn's question was kind of a segue. Can the charter endow the position of select board chair
Yes.
with mayoral authorities?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Sorry?
Mr. Ebert, would you say that again?
Basically, what I'm asking is, instead of creating a mayor, could we expand the authorities of the chairperson that the select board selects, appoints? I don't know.
Select
I don't know
board
what you do, but
selects,
yeah, depending on what people want from a mayor, there might be a simpler way of getting there. It's the purpose of my question.
You could vest some more of these sort of pomp and circumstance type authorities, the ceremonial authority, in the chair of the select board, who would be selected as the chair by the other members of the board. That is certainly one possibility that you could have. In other states in New England, we have what's called the first selectman, who serves largely like a de facto town manager, who has additional responsibilities in that office. And so it's more administrative responsibilities, but does in some respects also act like a mayor. Okay? Yes.
And just to add to that, Bob, the select board chair is chosen by the board.
That's right.
Yes,
The mayor is elected by the people.
yes.
That's,
Right.
that's
That is a fundamental difference that you would, yes.
But the select board is elected by the people, so.
Can you give me an example? Can you give us an example of ceremonial? Like what would constitute as going to in a ceremonial, like cutting ribbons or?
Cutting ribbons, marching in the parade, receiving the governor when the governor comes to visit, all right?
Testifying at the legislature.
Testifying at the legislature. There is it's not necessarily ceremonial, but there is an organization of Vermont mayors, and they work together in lobbying as well.
And there's 9 of them?
And they're not yet. It's a small group. They know each other very well.
Potentially being a
And
spokesman.
I wonder too, because you've got Virginia City, and then you've got Burlington. So they also cover a pretty broad spectrum of municipality sizes too. So they may not all be of like mind on all of the issues. Okay? In Berry City, the manager appoints and removes all department heads and other officers. The council is expressly prohibited from giving orders to appointed officers and employees subordinate to the manager. And you'll see this, if you look at charters, you'll see this quite frequently, where there is an express wall placed between the council and the manager and the manager's staff. And that is to prevent an end run around the manager to the council to try and, subvert the authority of the manager. Right? So the charters will typically say the council shall not interfere with or direct the operations of staff of the city. And in Berry City, the charter provides that the manager is responsible for carrying out city council policies. In Berry City has an elected city clerk. I believe it's the word is actually one person who is elected to be both clerk and treasurer. So they have an elected city clerk who basically functions like a town clerk. Likewise, city treasurer has the same responsibilities as a town treasurer. And they have a city assessor appointed by the manager. So the city assessor is a member of the staff in Berry City. Any questions on that?
Typically when,
Yep.
this is maybe off, do mayors belong to certain parties?
I don't see it in the state of Vermont. I couldn't tell you what anyone's party affiliation is, if any. I don't see it as being partisan in the state of Vermont.
Because in our charter, the town manager has to be non-partisan.
Apolitical.
Right.
Yes, apolitical. And could the mayor have a party affiliation? I suppose so. All right? But I don't see it playing out that way I don't see it playing out that way in cities. I don't see it playing out that way in local government in the state of Vermont generally. I don't see, yes, sir.
Oh, you finish your answer to her.
No, it just doesn't, we got to get it done. I don't care what you call yourself. You got to show up at the meeting and we got to get this stuff done. And then, so the labels that go along with folks kind of get set
Well, I
aside.
mean, because the Bennington charter is very specific about the opposite of that.
Yeah, and you will see that with respect to managers. And you'll actually see it in that manager statute that I talked about. Mm-hmm. This came out of the progressive era in government. And we really want, the turn of not the last century, but the one before that, the notion of we should bring some professionalism to government because we had a lot of things going on back in the day, like favoritism and cronyism and appointing your friends to all the nice juicy jobs. So the reaction to that was to say, we are going to hire a professional who is going to be responsible for these functions, and we're going to make sure that they're not a political person. And they're going to be appointed without regard to their political affiliation.
Thank you.
Okay?
Jim, can I add to that?
Yes, sir.
The Vermont City Managers Association and the International City Managers Association, both organizations of managers and city managers, specifically contain that kind of language. The managers must not and shall not involve themselves in the political process. And there are some managers in the state of Vermont, I can tell you, that won't even sign petitions for articles that go on the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
They won't sign petitions for people to run for they take it to the extreme, and not at all.
And as well, you will typically see provisions in charters that saying that the manager shall not hold any elective office in the municipality. That is part of the state statute for city managers, or for town managers as well. Right?
Thank
So,
you.
yes, sir.
You may have answered it. I guess I don't quite understand why a town manager as a citizen should be denied the right to participate in political activity. I mean, I understand the history of cronyism and this and whatever, but if a town manager wants to be part of the Democratic caucus in his community, I'm surprised that a law can deny someone that kind of basic civil right. Is there a very clear statement of purpose as to why a town manager has to be excluded from that part of the
Clear
civil
statement
right?
of purpose. I would have to go back and look at the debates of the legislature at the time that the general statute for managers was being enacted. I mean, again, I think it's to separate the political from the administrative. That's the basic thought. And again, to invoke the notion of professionalism in the operation of government. Now, is that still relevant today? Okay, maybe it is less of a concern than it was 100 years ago. Okay, just fair point. So, all good? We're getting it? Everything? We'll look a little bit about Bennington's charter. All right, so you've got a population of a little bit over 15,000 people here. Oh, and I think before we go on, we used sort of Rutland City and Berry City to sort of compare and contrast the office of mayor and how it can be two different things depending on how your charter is structured. Also need to keep in mind always that it does depend on personality and who holds the office. It also depends on sort of the expectations of the community as well and who they are going to elect. And so, for example, if I were to compare the Berry City charter provisions related to the mayor and city council to the Montpelier City Council provisions for the mayor and city council, you're going to see relatively similar language. They're not identical, but they're pretty close. But if you look at the function of how those two cities that are right next to each other operate, it is very, very different. The relationship between Bill Frazier and John Holler, their manager and their mayor, is much different than the relationship between Tom Lozon and Steve McKenzie in Berry City. And that's a function of who gets elected, what the expectations of the community are. And so the point to keep in mind there is, even if you have specific language, it may be different than what you expected it was going to be. Always, okay? So, onward with the town of Bennington. Population just over 15,000 or over 15,000. You're electing your clerk and treasurer to 3-year terms. You, unlike, as we said earlier, towns in the state of Vermont have a 7-member select board rather than 5 or 3. You have a town manager appointed by your select board, and you have a 3-member board of listers appointed by your select board. And you have some pretty unusual things in your charter. Not that, you know, it's some interesting things to sort of pick out and look at. The voters have the authority to compel non-binding advisory votes, and the select board must place these articles on the warning. That is in section 103. The way it works in other municipalities in the state of Vermont is that the voters can petition to have articles put on the warning for town meeting. But those things, the select board is only required to put those articles on if the law says this is something that the voters are granted the authority to vote on at town meeting. If it's something advisory or discretionary, the select board can say, no, we don't think that it's going to be on the warning this year. So for example, there might be some sort of article about war, whatever the case, nuclear disarmaments. That was one of the 80s, I think. And so in Bennington, if that was petitioned and in proper form, the select board would have to say, oh, we have to put this on the warning. Whereas up the road in Shasbury, the select board could say, this is something that's too controversial and it doesn't have anything to do with town business, so thank you for the petition, but we're not going to vote on it here this year. So your voters have that authority to compel these non-binding advisory votes. Bennington voters have the authority to recall elected officers. There are 16 other municipal charters that have recall provisions. There is no general statutory recall authority, as we've said, in the state of Vermont. So you are one of 17 that has this unique authority. Your select board has the authority to establish special assessment districts without a town vote. In everywhere else in the state of Vermont that I am aware of, in order to create a special assessment district, a special taxing district, that has to be approved by the voters of the municipality. So your select board has a unique authority there. You also have the Bennington Downtown District, which is a district recognized in your charter that has special authorities and things and responsibilities. And I believe that is also unique. I'm not aware of any other downtown district that comes out of a municipal charter. There are ways to create a downtown district or different districts in the state of Vermont, but I'm not aware of any charter authority to do so.
Jim, that first point, the special assessment districts, that's distinct and different from like a local options tax.
That is different from a local options tax. So let's say, what is a special assessment? Let's say that there is some provision of municipal service that is we're only going to provide to this area of the municipality. Excuse me, in some towns that might be a water service or a sewer system service, okay? And we can levy a special assessment on the area served by that municipal service that is not generally applicable to anywhere else in the municipality. So it's a special district, and only the people residing or owning property in that district are responsible for paying the tax. That's a special assessment district. And it's different. Rooms and meals tax, okay? That is a tax on, there is sales, rooms, meals, and alcohol. And it is a tack-on tax, we'll talk about it, on the state's general sales tax or tax on those items, all right? So, some things to think about. Should Bennington have a mayor? We've had a lot of discussion about that. Among Vermont municipalities, there are stronger mayors and there are weaker mayors, and we took two examples out there. The mayor can be the chair of the council and ceremonial head of government, or the chief executive officer, and it's sort of a continuum. Where do we want, if we want a mayor, we should think about where we want to be on that continuum, because it's not an all or nothing, and it's not necessarily binary, okay? This or that. If you have a mayor, what should the responsibilities of the manager be, and how will those intersect? Do we need to have a manager? Sorry, Stu, I just have to bring it up. Okay, I mean, you know, it's good. It is a legitimate question.
I ask myself that many times.
Every day, right? What do they need me for, right? There are stronger managers and weaker managers, just like there are stronger mayors and weaker mayors. Most of the manager's strengths, when we talk about stronger or weaker, in my opinion, lie in the authority to make appointments of employees and department heads, to administer the budget, the municipal budget, without oversight or interference from the city council or select board. So how much authority does the manager have in dealing with the budget during the course of the year? Yes, Tom?
Jim, with that point, there's some charters that still go to the body consent in certain offices, the employee.
Yeah, yes, there are. For certain departments or certain appointments do require the ratification or the approval of the select board or the city council, for example. Yes. Yeah. So again, it's not necessarily binary, and you can mix and choose as you want to do it. All right. And as we talked about earlier, some of the strengths in these offices, the mayor or the manager, depends on the personalities that are of the people holding those offices and the expectations
But
of the
Jim,
community.
more importantly, I mean, yes, personalities certainly play a role, but it's in the authority that's given to those positions.
Yes?
Isn't that what would make one a stronger or weaker? I mean, aside from somebody's personality?
I will tell you that in my opinion, it is as much the person who holds the office as what is written in the charter. I would say that they are almost equal, because there are, again, if you were to look at mayors having operating under similar charter language, you will see more prominent mayors, and those who wield more authority, more power in their communities, for lack of a better term.
They go to more ceremonies.
They go to more ceremonies. They're in the paper more. They express their opinions more strongly, and they take more positions on more things.
Those 9 people.
Yeah. Yeah, yes.
So Jim, having been in the weeds of this for the last several weeks,
Yeah.
it's kind of a chicken and egg thing or a procedural question. It would be a lot easier to vote and say, do we want a mayor or not a mayor, and then go back and rewrite that whole charter, because it's really complicated.
Yes, wouldn't it?
But on the other hand, you want to make sure the community knows what they're voting for. Are they voting for a ceremonial mayor, or are they voting for someone to replace the town manager?
Yes.
And understanding all the qualifications and the responsibilities that go with that. So what have you seen?
What do you do?
It feels like all these towns already have these, but
They already
how do
made-
people transition?
Yes, they made these decisions long ago, all of them. How do you make that decision now? How do you deal with that chicken and egg right now, right? What I would recommend to you is, first you understand these things and you think about the models, and then you have public forums in which you have people come to you and say, we're thinking about doing this, or these are our different options. If we were going to go down this road, what would you prefer? And try to gauge public sentiment as you are building the language to meet what you've heard. And it is in some respects a little bit of, you're going to take some risk, right? Maybe what you propose ultimately doesn't get there.
But Jim, isn't there more than one vote for a mayor? First you have to have a vote to see if you want the mayor form of government, and then the second vote is to decide what type of mayor you have.
No, because the mayor language is going to be set when it comes out of here and goes to the select board, and if they decide to warn it.
Here's a petition I got out there. No, seriously, you can read
This is it, okay? This is the.
See if that's legal then, Jim. You're a lawyer.
Well, I'm not gonna rule on the legality of this.
No, I'm just saying, that's the way it's out there. My lawyer drafted up Paul Gillis, so.
So I think, what Lynn raises a really interesting question.
Let me just, in lieu of the town manager, the mayors may vote to adopt a mayoral form of government. Okay, so they're going to vote for a mayoral form of government.
In lieu of the town manager.
The town manager, by voted at a duly warned annual meeting, warned pursuant to petition signed by 5% of the voters. Once they vote in favor of this form of government, interested. Okay, I had not thought of it in this way, and you consulted with someone I assume who pretty knowledgeable in how these
Paul
things.
Gillis is the municipal.
Yep. So again, it's a shall we vote on this, and then shall we do this? Once they vote in favor of this form of government is successful, the voters shall elect a mayor at their next annual meeting. Once the mayor takes office, the town manager system of government shall end. The mayor shall be responsible for the management. Well, yes and no, because it does lay out here what the manager's responsibilities are.
But you wouldn't have a manager if they adopt this.
What the mayor's responsibilities are. Because it goes on to say the mayor shall be responsible for the management and administrative affairs of the town in the same manner and the same powers and responsibilities as the town manager.
Right.
So you actually are getting a form when the community
strong-
wants to go forward.
A strong,
So it's not really like we're making it up after we decide to go this way.
no, you'd have a strong mayor form of government.
Yeah, so we actually are defining the mayor's form of
You
government.
said the strong leadership.
Is she? We'll do that. Okay.
So,
Yeah.
Jim, I don't know if you were getting to this now, but
Yes.
that raises the question of the procedure for amending the charter. And it sounds like there's a petition that would be to amend the charter and then require an amendment to the charter later on to flesh out the details. I haven't read it yet, so I don't
Yes.
know. But can you just go through what what the process for amending the charter is, and I know there are a couple.
Okay, there are, well, we can. Okay, we'll go to the process, all right?
Ask a question real quick before we move on from
Yes, sir.
local option tax, just real quick.
Yes.
A local option tax, I mean, I don't know the details of it, but can we craft that in such a way that rooms and meals are excluded from that additional tax? Okay.
Okay. Yep. So I will get to how can I just address a couple of things before we get to the process?
Absolutely.
Okay, so the next slide was, I believe the next slide was local option tax. Should we have a local option tax? By way of background, because you'd asked earlier, what's the difference between a local option tax and special assessment district? Back in, excuse me, currently in 2016, there's 14 municipalities with local option sales tax and 17 municipalities with local option meals, alcohol, beverage, and rooms taxes, okay? And the way this came about being was back when, you'll recall, back when Act 60 came into being back in the day, there were what were called the gold towns. And the gold towns were going to lose a lot of the revenue that they used to fund their local school systems. It was going to be taken from those towns and put into a statewide pool. And as sort of compensation for that, those communities were given the option of enacting a local option sales tax on these types, for these categories. They were the gold towns, and they were, I can't remember, 7, 8 original ones in the list. Maybe there were a few more, but Bennington was not one of them. So in order to have a local option tax in the town of Bennington, you now have to do that. You would be required to do that through your charter. Okay.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yes, ma'am.
If we were to implement, say it was a sales local options tax, can we designate, at least in part, where that money goes
Where
to?
that
So
money
for
will
example, we have one of the only Home Depots in the area, and people come in from all over to use that, so they're wear and tear on our roads and wear and tear on, so can we designate, you know, where some of that would go?
I believe you could through your charter.
You can, okay.
Okay. I believe you could. I'm going to, and I say I believe. Right? I think it is possible to do that. I'd have to reserve final judgment on that. That's a little bit of a technical question. Okay. I think you can go there. All right. So the charter amendment process. We're there. You there? Did I skip anything? Don't think so. Local option tax. No. Charter amendment process. So your charter does provide a sort of start-off point for charter amendments. And that says that the select board appoints a charter review committee, you folks, to recommend changes therein as it finds necessary or advisable for the purpose of improving the operation of town government. And you are obligated to provide a written report. And then at the discretion of the select board, such amendments may be warned for ballot vote at an annual or special town meeting, to be held no later than 1 year after the submission of the report. There is also a statutory process that involves a petition being submitted for a charter amendment. And it does exist, it is out there. It'd be interesting that if someone was to give an opinion on how that intersects with the Bennington Charter, whether the Bennington Charter requires that all of the proposed amendments to the Bennington Charter have to first initiate out of the Charter Review Committee or the Select Board. An interesting question. Okay. The Select Board, once that proposal comes to the Select Board or the Select Board has that proposal, there's a requirement that the board hold at least 2 informational hearings prior to a public vote. So these are to get public input on those and to inform the voters about the proposed amendments. The voting has to be by Australian ballot. If the amendments are approved, the clerk transmits a copy of the amendments, proposed amendments, to the legislature. And then those amendments become effective upon affirmative action by the legislature. So remember, we started that this is an amendment to state law. So it has to go through both houses of the legislature for approval. Goes in GovOps committees, gets referred out of there, approved by the by the Senate or the other side. It essentially follows the same process for approval of any other law in the state of Vermont, okay? And once it is approved by both houses and signed by the governor, it becomes the law of the town of Bennington, right? As a state statute, the legislature is free to amend the charter proposal as it sees fit. Now, my experience looking at it has been when it comes out of the municipality, and so long as there's clear expression of voter support for it, the legislature will not monkey with it very much. They'll probably say, that looks good to us, thank you, and pass it on. Most charter amendments pass through the legislature without change. They don't do that, although it's not unheard of. Nevertheless, of course, you should be ready to testify in support of your charter before the legislature, and you want to have all of those processes lined up ahead of time. Right? So be ready to go there and support, testify on behalf of, in support of what your community has proposed. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about how it's presented to the voters and then how it's presented to the legislature as far as, are they voting on line items or chunks, or are they voting on,
That's going
all
to
or
be
nothing?
how the select board's going to be determined how that will be presented to the voters. Okay?
And Jim,
Yes,
you
Stu?
mentioned,
I'm sorry.
so go ahead, Stu.
In the end, once the voters have approved the document, however it manifests itself, the document as a whole goes to.
We'll go up to the legislature.
Not bit by bit.
Not bit by bit, that's right. The select board can't say, oh, we're not going to send this one up to the legislature because we really didn't like that one. It'll all go as a package. Yes,
Once
no.
it gets there, the legislature still has the prerogative of piecemealing their
They do have the prerogative of piecemealing.
And
They have the
that was-
prerogative of piecemealing or amending as they see fit. It is ultimately their choice.
And it doesn't need to get re-voted on once they, if the legislature decides to amend it. They're the final say.
They are the final say. Yes,
And,
sir.
and finally to my question, Jim, we're going
Yes.
to jump in,
Yeah.
because it relates to all of that. My understanding was that if the charter comes out of the select board, or the charter amendments come out of the select board and go up, amendments can happen. But if it's done by petition from the voters, it cannot.
Cannot be modified by the
legislature.
select.
That was
board.
what my
That's
understanding was.
that's my understanding of that statute as well. Okay, that they are obligated. Essentially, it's confirmed that it comports with the law generally, right? It's not going to be something that's unconstitutional, and let's fix the typos that are in it, and then present it to the voters.
But it's an up or down, not a
Right, it's an up or down.
move around.
So when people go to the polls, maybe this was answered, I don't know. Are they voting on every change we've made, bam, 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 or are they voting on the charter as it's been presented as an amended document? They're just going to vote yes or no on one question.
It's going to be it's going to be how the select board chooses to present it to the voters. Most likely by sections.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and that seems reasonable to me. Especially if you're making extensive amendments, we may not want to have it all go up sink or swim. All right.
Well,
so
I
let's-
think, that's interesting in that if the committee recommends combining sections, so if you basically take out what we feel might be a duplicate of a section,
Yes.
then if you present the one section as a deletion and the next section as amendments and
Yeah. How are we
moving
going to
it,
do that one?
then to me, I see it more as a whole document, but you're saying that's really up to the
They're going to have to
select
figure that one out.
They're going to have to figure, so we
Not
don't have to
me.
worry about it.
Well, I think you should talk with them. Okay. I just certainly, it's going to have to be that's going to have to be figured out. Okay. I don't have the answer to how that will be handled on that. I know what you're thinking of.
Okay.
Jim, do you have to bring it all together this year? If the important ones that they thought would be this year, but like the option tax, they're not do that this year, and then next year, the next voting
Maybe bring some others forward.
together as a charter change.
I think that goes back to the language of your charter. Discretion of the select board, such amendments may be warned for ballot vote in an annual or special meeting to be held no later than 1 year after the submission of the report. So I think if it comes from a report from this committee, it has to be voted on no later than 1 year after submission of the report. So it could be 2 meetings potentially within that year, but there is
So would it not be better for this committee here to bring up the first important ones, number first, and then 6 months later, bring the other one?
I'll let them decide.
Thank you, Jim.
Mike, could you restate that? I couldn't quite hear what you just said.
Would it not be better for you people to start looking at the important ones we want for this voting cycle,
Okay.
and then hold off to the other ones and present them 6 months down the road so they could be at the next voting opportunity?
So I think this has been written in a couple of the articles about the committee's work, but the committee, sort of as a group, decided that because we were charged with looking at the whole document, that we're going through the entire document and then going back to sections as we get input or we feel that something needs to be changed. So that's really more for the community to hear, Mike. I'm not disagreeing with you, and I don't think the committee's disagreeing with you on how the outcome might be, but the reason we've been meeting weekly is to try and get through the whole thing before November or December.
No, that's fine. I'm just saying, if you've got important things that you want, I wouldn't throw everything together, like Jim just said, to get maybe shot down. If the option tax is something on the select board's mind or other things, I would work to bring that forward so the voters are confused and understand it. You don't waste the whole year in a committee, that's all.
Can I say something there?
Sure.
I think one of the things is it looked like, I think in some of the communication, that we were setting the mayor issue aside. That really wasn't, that was just a logistical thing. That's an important issue. But I think we really do want community involvement and community input. And I mean, I'm really happy to see some people out here, but I'm really hoping that we get a lot more community input. And we are going to have 2 more sessions that are more, this one's kind of educational, but the next one is more, let's hear what everyone has to say. Because
If I'm successful getting all the signatures, you won't have to worry about the mayor.
Well,
We're
actually,
still going to do our job.
well,
And
exactly.
we are hopeful that we will get a lot of public feedback, discussion. We don't have the dates yet for the October and November sessions, and I think we're waiting on Cat TV because we want to have those publicized as well. But we're really, we had this as an informational forum, and from here we're encouraging and hopeful that we'll have more input from Mike, for instance. This petition we've not seen, so it's something that we want to be able to look at even ourselves, and it's not like because someone else is doing it we're going to ignore it. We're going to be looking at anything that everyone brings to us, as well as what we
So is this an
ourselves.
advisory petition?
No.
This is not.
Well, we can talk about that at some other point, but we have Jim here. It's about 7 minutes to 7, and I think we were going until 7.
Well, we
But-
took the room until then. Well, you know what, I wanted to know, the people who we haven't seen before, if you have any specific questions that Jim might be able to answer that you might have come out for. No?
No? Okay.
Is this documentation, is about a PDF online somewhere that could be shared out on social media? Especially the mayor, the manager, city, towns.
I will get it to Rob.
Which documentation are you talking about, Joe?
My PowerPoint?
The PowerPoint?
That'd be great if we
Yeah.
could just use that.
There is a PowerPoint that's on our website, which hopefully will be soon easier to access from when Jim presented to us, and it was also public, but it was.
This one?
So this
What did I
is,
say?
Similar to
School
this,
bus, that's
it's
on the
got
town
a little bit of
website.
differences.
But there's one there now, and we'll have this one up as well.
I can get to- okay. This time.
Jim, I know I'm not getting into the weeds for a bit of time, but you talked about managers, contracts, and arrangements. I think that would be really important to hear relative to a professional manager serving at will on a term of contract. I think we share that with the committee, break down the various towns that have
I could, I haven't summarized it, but I could do that for them.
I think that would be helpful,
Okay?
just to see what the other communities are doing in that context. The only reason I ask that is because when you have a professional, and it's at will, how strong is your base, your pool of potential
Yes.
professionals?
Yep.
To come in at a will,
I will, yes.
next to
Very good question. So I can arrange at will or for cause. Okay? That would be available, so we could take a look at that as well, yes.
Are you saying of the town managers and the 9 mayors?
Just the managers are going to have, just the managers.
Okay.
Just the managers. Yeah, we can, at least I can give you a good flavor of it.
So actually, we often vote on the clerk's salary or the treasurer's salary. Do the towns that vote on a mayor do you put the mayor's salary out there as well?
It's going to typically be a line item in the municipal budget, not a standalone article to set their salary.
So it would be in the budget?
It'll be in the budget, typically.
But who determines that salary? The mayor?
It'll be depends on which municipality it is. Like, for example, in Berry City, the manager is responsible for coming up with the budget. It does get approved by the council before it gets warned for vote. All right? So it's going to ultimately, I think, in most communities, it's actually going to circle back through the select board or the council before it goes to the voters. So they're going to have the final say on what is presented to the voters. Okay.
That's why it's done now.
Right. It's effectively the way you do it now. Anything else?
Thank you. Jim?
Thank you.
One more, can you go back to the option tax? Could the option tax, if it gets voted in the select board every year deem it to go to like a Boys and Girls Club or Rhodes or whatever, would they put that in, say a question every year as to what they want that to go to in front of the people, instead of just putting it in the general fund and letting the town manager or the select board use it anywhere they want?
Maybe, Mike? Maybe.
Because you'd be having the option tax, and that would be up to the people that how we spend that. We're predicted that we might get $1 million. What was that, $1 million point, whatever?
Yeah, 5 million, be it less because 30% goes to the state.
So essentially, present to the voters an option, present to the voters
How will you
how
spend?
that will be spent.
Yeah, if you could find out that question, because I think it would be easier to sell the option tax to the public if they do it just wasn't going to go willy-nilly into the general fund and then we see it again.
I'm going to leave that to staff to come up with.
I think that technically, under the law, that can be done. Much as we establish reserves, and we have to outline on the ballot what those reserves are to be used for. I think you could establish that as a reserve and designate it every year.
Couldn't they just any resident of the town petition for a specific, much the same way that we did for the rescue squad?
No.
For a specific?
No, because I say no. Maybe I'm getting far beyond my legal authority.
I don't think anybody could petition for
Yeah,
the option tax.
No.
Oh,
In terms
For
of-
specific use of the fund for the option.
No, you can petition for funds if you're a social service agency, being eligible to be able to do that. An individual can.
And in terms of earmarking the taxes to anything, what the charter amendments will be and what the charter is now, it's state law. So anything state law can do, that can do. So I don't see any reason why we would be able to put in there that there's this tax that will have some decision each year by the town, if that's something. No, by the town. You could put it on the ballot or by the select board or however.
I have a question for the board in general with respect to how you plan to roll this out. Do you intend to give it all to us at one time, or should we have a debate piecemeal
Yeah.
with the topics that you're addressing?
So far, our decision on that has been to essentially give it all at one time. That can change, but that's what our focus has been so far. And we're understanding how, I think the phrase "going into the weeds" has been mentioned a number of times tonight, and so how that can be. So we're cognizant of that, Jim. So.
But I believe the select board chair stated a preference that we simply submit a final report as opposed to updates, if I understand.
The reason that the committee exists is for the purpose of giving us recommendation of the whole. And if we get into the weeds on each particular section, they and the select board, given night, we'll never get to the end of that. So really that's what we're looking for. We're going to have to debate it anyway. So let's get it full block and talk about it.
And just to also be clear, the final report we envision as a very professional document to explain anecdotally and otherwise why each change was made or why there was no change. We kind of have a running document for the wordsmithing, the actual intent, and why we might have moved something. And that's, as a whole, we want to be able to tell the community that even if it doesn't see a change, we want you to know that we discussed it, we debated it, and that we felt that the language was still relevant. And likewise, if the item was relevant, but the language wasn't relevant, we might change or recommend changing the language to be more modern or current with the same intent that the section has. So I think we've been very cognizant that we need to sort of stand behind what we're doing, if that makes sense.
Can I throw one more thing in and then I'll shut up?
You don't have to shut up.
But what if the select board really would like, or the town would like to know about certain things like the option tax? Right now, I'm not for or against the option tax. But if we can get the option tax this year in front of the people, and we can find benefit for it, I don't want the public to be confused about it or be feeling negative about it because of all of these other things that you're bringing up. I think it would be prudent for the select board to ask you people, we've asked you to do this in the beginning, but we're asking you now to come up with 2 or 3 important things that we don't have to wait, over the March election for.
Can I respond to that real quick? Yeah. We had a long discussion about how to approach this charter review. And in general, we felt it's an entire document. It's a whole document. We shouldn't piecemeal it. We should not bring our own agendas and one person says, well, this is the most important thing. Someone says, no, this is the most important thing. We don't want people to be suspicious of what we're doing. Well, why did you put this at the top of the list? And why are you ignoring this? And we decided the cleanest, I'd even say purest way of approaching this document was to start on page 1 and review the document. Personally, I want to depoliticize this entire exercise. It's up to the select board to take our recommendations and decide what to do with them. I don't want to be pushed or pulled by any political expediency. We would like to have our recommendations in front of the voters by March, but the charter gives us a year to do this work, and I can't speak for everyone. If it takes us a year, if it's not until March of 2019 that we vote on these things, the town will still be here. I want to have a slow, thorough, thoughtful review of this document, and I don't want to be pushed to hurry or to prioritize anything. And so that's where I'm coming from. I understand everything you're saying, but that's where I'm coming from.
I don't ask anybody to be pushed to hurry, number 1.
Right.
Number 2, Jim, if this comes about, can't the select board on its own?
I'm going to give a presentation to the public, not mediate an argument.
No, I'm just asking a legal question.
I'm not going to provide an answer.
Thank you.
So, just to follow up on what Robert was saying, the intent is to do this thoroughly with enough time to, as Lynn has pointed out, this is more of an educational presentation for people to ask questions about the process and the different forms of government. The same thing would happen, I believe we would try and find somebody that had the information on the option tax and what that would mean to the town and how the money could be dispersed. Because what we have tried to do is bring in people or documentation that informs us on how we would make a decision in the charter. So the same, I believe the same thing would happen with the option tax. It wouldn't just be our opinions on how we thought it might work. It would be our opinions after hearing from people whose towns might have done it, from the legislature, from legislative council. Rob has contacted legislative council on how they want it submitted. I mean, we've really tried to cover all the different areas in reviewing this document.
And I think one other really important thing, one of the reasons that we did kind of put in the parking lot the big issues is we're hoping to give time to get that feedback from the community, because we are kind of just the workhorses here going through everything, but it's really the input of all of our citizens that are going to make this or shape this document.
Yes.
If I could, and I think this might have been what Mike was driving at his last question. It is possible for the select board to submit or to the voters a charter change that does not necessarily go through this committee. So if the select board chose that option as really an issue they want to review and you folks aren't finished, they can do that on their own.
Yes, thank you.
So we do have an official meeting, so we need to officially close it. I'm going to let Rob do that. But if there's any other questions?
I have one, Jim, can you step back? I think, is there only really one Benningtonian in that picture?
One Benningtonian in that picture.
Robert?
No, he was born in Colorado.
Oh.
I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry.
So with that, apparently there's a New Yorker as well. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much for coming.